The sun has left and forgotten me. It's dark.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief storymaker at Elkins Consulting. Whether you're sharing business stories or personal stories, the stories you share can affect your internal messages, your internal dialogue, and also the way people perceive you. So when you're intentional about the stories you share, you have the potential to truly influence your own confidence and the people around you. If you're in the middle of interviewing for a job, or you're about to release a book or something like that, where you know you're going to be interviewed on podcasts and in media, check out my job interview storytelling course on Udemy. The link is at elkinsconsulting.com. Today's episode, featuring Claudia Krevat, is all about how we feed people and nurture them in order to build community. And if you've listened to any of these episodes, you know how important that is to me and what value I place in being able to have thoughtful conversations around controversial issues. And what better environment to do that than at the dining room table with food in front of you, healthy food that has been prepared by people who care. I'm going to share a brief story, and then I will introduce Claudia. When my younger son was having his bar mitzvah, it was scheduled for June 21st, 2014, and my father, who was supposed to be here, of course, in Montana, passed away on February 20th in that same year. We had a beautiful bar mitzvah day that June, and of course, I spent quite a bit of time trying to stop myself from crying because I missed my father and I knew he was supposed to be there. But that evening, we hosted Max's reception at our home. We had about 80 people in our backyard. The backyard was decorated with bright fairy lights. We had a popcorn maker and a cotton candy maker in the back. We catered it ourselves with brisket from beef from very local ranches that I specifically picked out. We had amazing food and a lot of people who really cared deeply for my family and particularly for Max. And what I remember the most was it was toward the end of the evening and I brought out a huge birthday cake because Max was concerned that by having his bar mitzvah on his actual birthday, he called it his birth mitzvah, he was concerned that people would forget that it was also his birthday. So I brought out that huge cake and the candles were lit. And the entire group of us, most people not Jewish, who had never been to a bar mitzvah before in their lives, who were just for the first time being introduced to very beautiful rituals and traditions in the Jewish religion. And they all sang happy birthday to our boy. And if there had been a roof over us, it would have been blown to bits with the love and energy that came from that song. I don't even like the happy birthday song, but I've never heard it sung in such depth and love. When I met Claudia, I think I told her that story. And we had a beautiful conversation about what it means to be in community around a table. And I am just so grateful for Claudia to be here today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Sarah.
Claudia, tell me your story that came to your head as you were listening to mine.
Well, I married a Jewish guy, so a lot of memories came to my head when you were talking about the birthday celebration. And I remember Steve's family would invite me over to their home when we were just starting to date. And I had never seen Hanukkah or never celebrated a lot of the Jewish holidays. And when Papa started speaking Hebrew and saying the prayers and bringing the plates, you know, depending on which holiday it was, I'll never forget the one where, and I forget the names, I'm sorry, where you have the apple with the walnuts, because it's supposed to be something acid, and then there was a
Passover.
chicken neck, like a chicken
Pesach. Yes,
Yes.
Passover. That's the exodus
Passover.
of the Jews from Egypt. And you're probably referring to the lamb shank that represents
Yes.
the Paschal lamb.
Yes, I will never forget that. Just looking at the plate and looking at all the beautiful plate, it's a round plate and it has like a little space for each, and it was blue and white. And we were all gathered at the table, and there's Papa speaking. And Papa married an Italian woman who was also a Gentile like me. And it was just this beautiful celebration of these different cultures and different religions all put together. And yet there was one common ingredient, and it was love. That's exactly how I felt. And then after the prayers were over and we started to get the real deal going and eating, it became loud. And I'm like, oh my God, they're just like us Latins. I'm not okay with this family. So you were talking about all of this, and I was just seeing the images in my mind about my first celebration with my Jewish family.
Oh, I love that. So for our listeners, that what Claudia is describing is the Passover Seder, where we celebrate the Jews' exodus from Egypt and out of slavery. And she's describing what's called the Seder plate, which is the plate with the separation for each of the symbols that we discuss as we tell the story of the exodus from Egypt. And what I love about what you just described is that it is so far beyond religion. This isn't dogma. This isn't judgment. This is bringing people together to learn a little bit about history, to learn about the culture, to understand the symbols and the symbolism behind this whole event. It's as much as it can be a religious thing, because that's, a lot of Jewish people are more religious than secular. But I would say that the majority of people I know that celebrate those Jewish holidays, they're doing it for the ritual, not in a religious necessarily connotation.
Right. To keep the culture going. Let's not lose our roots.
Right. Remind us of our identity.
Exactly.
So you did not grow up in the United States. So I would love to hear a story of your household. I mean, the reason our household is what it is, and I could tell that story about Max's bar mitzvah and birthday, is because I grew up in a household where no one was ever turned away from a meal. My mom and dad would, no matter how tight money was, if I brought a friend over, or there are 3 of us kids in the family, we always brought friends over to eat. And didn't matter how tight money was, we always had enough food to feed people. That's just the household I had. And I'm so grateful for it now. I am pretty sure that you had a similar upbringing, and I would love to hear what that was like.
Right. So I didn't grow up with my mom and my dad. They went their separate ways when I was very young, and I lived with an aunt and an uncle and 5 male cousins.
Yeah.
So we lived in this, they lived, and I joined them in this very large house in Colombia's Caribbean coast. The house was, I call it the gingerbread house, because it was the color of gingerbread. It had 2 stories and like reddish tiles, reddish maroon, like you have seen in the Mexican movies, etc. And with big windows that opened up, like French style windows. And then the dining room, they were actually from floor to ceiling, and you open the whole thing like an accordion. We had home cook, because in South America, when I was growing up, we had an extended family of people that worked in the house, just like we did here in the American South. They weren't slaves. They were actually part of our family, like in some Southern homes. These people become part of the family as well. And Mama Esco was my nickname to her, Maria Scorsia. She took me under her wings because she knew that I was sad that not to live with my parents. So she knew I loved to eat because I came with a few pounds in my body to live with that. So she would invite me to the kitchen and teach me how to cook. And that's where my passion for food started. So she would tell me stories about mermaids and pirates and the Caribbean Sea and all of these things. And as she was teaching me, she would be telling me these stories, teaching me how to peel the shrimp and do all of these things. But one of the great events was when all the 5 boys, because they went to the university as well in Bogota, when they were visiting and that table was full, it was 8 of us. It was, let's say, Saturday afternoon, 2:00, always a late lunch, and we had shrimp and rice, arroz con camarón, and my uncle would be listening to the soccer game. And every time our team scored, we would stop eating and, and do all these loud stuff. And they call the soccer ball esférico. It was just a terminology for the soccer ball. And I kept saying, wow, that player is really important. They just keep mentioning his name. And we would all just like laugh. And then the trays with the rice and the steam and the smell of fresh shrimp just going throughout the table and the sweet plantains. And then, and then came dessert and then came coffee. So we were there for the whole soccer game, 90 minutes. So I'll never forget, that was on Saturdays when the Junior, which was the name of the team, played in town. So that's a memory that, between being in the kitchen and peeling the shrimps and feeling I was part of it, to bringing them over to the table and be surrounded by men. It was so much fun.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I feel like I'm right there with you, sitting at that dining room table with the wide open doors so that you're looking out into the nature and openness. And I love that you spent that time in the kitchen to learn and smell and feel loved and comforted in there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. And then I guess that's what I try to bring to my lentil table.
Yes. Okay. So tell us without telling us about the lentil table, all the background, tell me a story about a recent one that you did, a recent event that you hosted, where you noticed something and just had that sense of, this is right where I was supposed to be. This is my destiny right here.
It happened this last summer. This last summer, we have a place here in Bozeman that is called Bodie Farms, and it's an ecological farm where they actually do yoga, they have meditation, and then they have farm dinners and promote all the farmers. And they allow me to come and bring my lentil table over to them. And I decided to bring music and dancing to this lentil table. And I asked everybody to wear some sort of costume, whatever they wanted to wear. And I prepared a beautiful spread of lentils, in different kinds. And I had music from all around the world. And at some point, this group of women got out of the table and started dancing. And I didn't say anything. It's just that the music, just between the music and the food, you were just intoxicated with all these wonderful things. And then all of a sudden, the kids are dancing, and I have conga music, I have salsa, and everybody's dancing. And I said, this is integration. This is cultures, because I'm a sociologist. That's what I went to school for. And by having food, music, and dance together, we forget our political ideology. We forget everything, and we just go there, we dance, we eat, and we speak with whoever's sitting next to us. So this just happened in August.
How many of these events have you hosted? Are you keeping track?
Well, I started in 2018. and 4 events because we added December. So 4 times 5, maybe, right? Well, I haven't done this year. So hold on, it's 6 years. 6 times 4, 24.
Wow.
But I have had 200 people.
At one or total?
They're not little parties. They are
Yes.
big. Yes.
So 200 people at one of these events.
Yes, I've had. Yes.
Wow. Wow.
Had
And
that. And last year I cut it like around 150 because I do all the cooking. So it got a little too big. But one year it was 200. How can you say no? Can I earn? People like, you're sold out, but I have family here visiting from whatever. Can I bring them over? Okay. And then like a good Latina and Jewish, we make a lot of food, right? So
you make room.
exactly. I never run out of food, and it's outside, and this is Montana, so there's always plenty of room.
Oh, I love that. What made you decide to do it the first time, the very first one? Because I'm thinking a lot about my first No Longer Virtual Summit, which I did in February 2017, and why it mattered to me at that point. And now I take inventory every year to decide if it still matters to me the way that it did then, if it's changed, if I need to do it again, or if it's time to retire it. What made you decide that was the time in 2018 to do it?
Well, it actually started before 2018 in a smaller scale, and I'll tell you how it started. In 2014, I befriended David Owen from Timeless Food, one of the first organic lentil growers in Montana. So I was invited to go on a book tour by Liz Carlisle, who wrote a book on the lentil growers called The Lentil Underground. And the book tour started in her alma mater, which is University of California in Berkeley, School of Journalism, led by Michael Pollan, who was her mentor. So she invited me to write a cookbook with her, and everything for the cookbook and everything got going. But at the same time, I was touring with them. Then she invited me, okay, now we got to take the tour to Montana. Will you tour with us? Of course I will tour with you. So every time we went to one of these farms, they had like a farm party or something like that, I would cook a dish of lentils or something. And the farmers were so proud. They would send me home with gallon bags full of the red lentils, the yellow lentils, the beluga lentils. So one day I was in my garage and I was counting, and I had 400 pounds of lentils. My family tired of eating lentils. Even the dog was eating lentils, and they loved it. The dogs, the animals love lentils. And I said, well, I'm gonna start feeding my community. So this was before COVID, of course. I had a little studio, private dining room in town. I don't live in town. I'm like 20 minutes south of town. And I started with like friends. And because I believe in promoting people, I would always have a special guest, and it was usually nonprofits or artists or dancers or things that I'm passionate about. And I would introduce them to my small community of 5 people. That's how we started. And from 5, we went to 10, and then we went to 20. And in 2015, I had to go to a park because I was already at 50 and I couldn't fit them in my little place that only had room for 20. So this is how we started, and it just kept growing and growing. But every time it grew, and of course I wanted to see it grow, and I would say, okay, I'm going to open to 100 people. And then people would ask me, and then 100 became 125, and I just kept on going to see how much I could do. before I knew it, we ended up with those 200. So getting back to your story, people wanted to be my special guest. People are offering me, do you want to do a lentil table at my nonprofit? So you know that when people are asking for it and your participation is growing, you're creating a positive impact. So that just got me fired up, and I just wanted to do more. And if I could have done one every month, if I would make money on it, right? Because it's all donation. I do charge $5 per person to come in, but pretty much everything is donated. And then towards the middle, I had people donating, farmers donating produce, ranchers donating beef, venues donating their venues. So it became a big pot of donations, and we all took part in it. So I just kept on going.
But you have not paid yourself, correct?
No, never.
Oh, it's all been
And people say you
voluntary
should charge more. And I'm like, if I could give it away, I would give it away. But those $5 per person help me to buy the ingredients that, I can't get. So yeah, I would have like $400, $500,
And you're feeding 200 people.
And then when I fed 200, I have 1,000. But guess what? Then I brought a DJ because I love music and I want the music to be loud.
I love it.
It became a big, delicious party, wonderful party, and nobody wanted to go home.
So, of course not. Well, you create that environment. I remember, this is before things got really, really polarized, but I remember we had a friend of mine over for dinner, and he is former military. He retired recently in the last 5 years, and he definitely was on as it goes, the other side of the political fence. But we would sit at our dining room table together and have these very thoughtful conversations about where our beliefs came from. And it was always over food. And our boys, who were teenagers at the time, would sit, the five of us would sit together. We'd invite him over because his family was not living in Montana yet. So he was batching it until they moved here. But I remember these great conversations. So our kids could hear us have these discussions about controversial issues. And that is a vivid memory for me of knowing that we have often had people with different views sit at our table and have these thoughtful conversations. And our boys, who are now 26 and 23, understand it. They've experienced it. And I don't see that happening enough. So tell me about your thoughts on that and how that conversation can happen around the lentil table.
Well, I'm going to tell you one that didn't happen at the lentil table, but happened at a cooking class. Is that okay?
Oh, yes, of course, because it's all involving food.
Before COVID, I used to teach cooking classes in my house. And people is like, how can you invite strangers? How can you let strangers into your house? Because I would post it and people would sign up and pay online and then come over to the house. And I'm like, it never really dawned on me that way, because strangers become friends around the dining room table. So maybe they come in as a stranger, but when they leave, I always hug. So, it works for me. When COVID came, it had to do more with safety, right? Then you start thinking about that. So we always cook together, because cooking together is even better than eating together. Because when
yes,
you're doing it together, when you cook with your family and your kids, that integration of it's almost like teamwork, right? Mm-hmm. So I would ask, okay, if you came with somebody, try not to cook a dish with them, but try to team up with somebody that you don't know. And pretty much some people did it. Some people that were younger maybe were apprehensive. So I had this one, and I would never forget it. It was a Cuban cooking class. So of course, and men came. So they were men as well. So when the men, when they sat at the table and we're talking about Cuban food, and I'm telling them my experiences because I lived in Miami for 25 years, etc., the conversation got not heated, but interesting because, of course, we're bringing politics in, and we're bringing communism in, and we're bringing, how all these things were affected by when Castro took over and Miami and all of these things. But in a very, it was almost like school, right? It wasn't people opinionating. It's like, I just want to know, how did that work out? And how did this work out? And then we finished, and then it was time to do the dishes. And I tell people, okay, guys, the class is over, food is over. It's time to go because, this is my house. They know that, right?
Right. It gets late.
But there were these two guys who didn't know each other. And the conversation started getting more to this country. And they started talking about Lewis and Clark, which was so wonderful. And then they expressed their opinions on ideology, and they were contrasting points of view. But for some reason, it never got ugly, right? And I don't know what to say so that I don't say something that seems like derogatory of any point of view. So I'm going to abstain for that. But there were no general comments. Oh, you all this or think this way. And then they brought it back to American history. And it's like, okay, how would Lewis and Clark deal with this? And I was just doing the dishes, and the dining room is right next to the kitchen. I could hear everything that they were talking about. And I was just fascinated to the point that I say, you know what, guys, it's really time. I'm done with the dishes. It's time to,
You have to go.
it's time to go. But when we're at the lentil table, it's all family style. There's separate tables, and people just sit wherever. I don't know exactly what the conversations are about, but I do know that the people that are at that table could be, because I just know from contrasting ideological points of view, it could be some people that have come have not yet learned English. And I have had a nonprofit that is the World Language Institute. So there were some people that do not speak any English, and they're there because the nonprofit brought them, and there were case studies, and they were talking about them. And people are just curious, So they have a little girl, and the little girl is from South America. She's from Mexico or whatever. And you see these people, and they just want to know, what's your name? And how do you say play in Spanish? So it kind of mellows out the tone. Right?
It does. I think that the most important aspect of all of this is that we don't have to have the political conversations at the table. I think what's most important is that we are exposed to different stories so that we understand that the people who might have opposing viewpoints politically and economically, that they are still human, and that we have more in common than we would anticipate.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I keep coming back to this idea of intention, that if we sit down at the table with people that have contradictory ideology or political ideas behind us, that when we sit down at the table, the intention has to be to connect.
Yeah.
It has to be curious about who this person is and what experiences created their perceptions and their values. Because if we go in with the intent to change someone's mind, then we're not making any changes in our political dynamic.
No. We know from raising kids that doesn't work.
Right, exactly.
How can we change somebody who's too stuck on their ways?
Right.
Why? And sometimes I want to reason and understand why do you think that way? I want to, but I can't. I can't. But so what do? You try to find something that you have in common,
Mm-hmm.
and not what you have alike. Because I remember one of the things that I always greet when I say is, and I think I got this from Maya Angelou. Now that I've been reading Maya Angelou again, I think this rub to me as part of my philosophy is that we have more in common than what separates us.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us have family in common. Whether we raise our families different, we still have a family. We still have a country that we try to protect and that we're proud of. We have some sort of spiritual belief. And it could be a different God or a different deity or whatever, but we have a spiritual belief. But it's just a different fruit salad. That doesn't mean I can't join you in a conversation because we're so different. My dad used to say, the more fruit in the tutti frutti, the better it tastes.
That's true.
I agree with that.
Yeah, for sure. I love this conversation because I know that as we sit around a dining room table, it's harder to generalize people. When we're knowing somebody sitting next to us who is from Mexico and their native language is Spanish, and we're knowing them in all of the complicated aspects of an individual, of a human being, it's much harder after that to say all Mexicans are A or all Spanish speakers do B, right? It's so much harder to do that when we've been exposed to somebody who is different from us that we might have had a judgment about before we met them based on one aspect of who they are.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you.
Yeah, I love that. So as we kind of come full circle and come back to where we started, when you think about your current community in Bozeman or just outside of Bozeman, and you think about your dining room table, what's the memory that comes to you?
Oh my goodness. There are just so many because that dining room table, number one, it sits 10 people. And there are so many occasions. And as a newcomer, when we first moved here from Miami, one of the things that I thought was really important was to show my daughters, then a second grader, third grader, she's now 34, to show her little friends that I had an accent because I come from this part of the world, and I would bring an atlas, and that Gabby has a Star of David because of this, because here in Bozeman, then there's more Jewish people now, but I mean, there weren't a lot of Jewish people at that time. And hardly any Colombians. I think there were just two of us. And of course, we're not about drugs. That's, that's not the Colombians. That's not who we are. So that's what comes to my mind first, is having this dining room table, maybe with one other mom, and all these little people there, and kind of doing a show and tell. So because I'm a teacher, I love to show people, this is who we are, and this is this accent, and this is where in the map it is, and this is the kind of food we eat. So that's my first memory. It was 1998.
1990. We moved here in 99. So I know,
so you know.
I'm feeling it. Yep, I'm feeling it
Yeah,
because
you
when
know
we moved
that.
to Helena in April, there was not a single box of matzah. For our listeners, that's the Jewish food that people eat in Passover time, and usually March or April. And I could not find a box of matzah in the entire city of Helena, and it's the capital of Montana. There's not matzah in this whole city. Thank you for sharing that memory, because I think a lot about how we represent our people. And by having your daughter's friends over, Gabby first of all, could own that identity with pride and love. And second, you were exposing these children to different cultures and foods that without you there, they may never have been exposed to that, because there are a lot of Montanans that stay here. But even if they had been exposed to it later in life, they had a familiarity with it because of you and Gabby and your husband, her dad.
You may have heard of these. They're called arepas. They're like a corn patty, right?
Mhm.
And I would go to the grocery store here and I would have the manager, Vince, order me a box, like I'm sure you did with, with your certain Jewish food. And then I would make these arepas for the girls and they loved it. And then one of them for college went to college in Portland, Oregon. And she sends me this message, tell your mom that they have arepas here. Oh, that's so cute.
I love that. Well, it's so important. And as one of the only Jewish families in the city of Helena, especially 99, 2000, and when our boys were in elementary school, it's changed a little bit now, but I felt this very strong responsibility to demonstrate what a Jewish person was, because otherwise it was left to their imaginations or what they had heard. And if they'd never actually met a Jewish person, they might have these judgments or lies that had been told to them. I can tell you, when my older son was in 7th grade, 2 boys by a bench started telling Nazi jokes. And knowing that my son was Jewish. And I knew that that was unusual because we had lived here they had gone to school since kindergarten here in Montana. I also knew that there were other kids in his school that had been exposed to Judaism because I taught at the elementary school. I went to the school every December to talk about Hanukkah. I brought dreidels for all the kids so I could show them how to play the spinning top game from Hanukkah. And I look back now and I am so glad that at least those few hundred kids every winter would be exposed to some aspect of Judaism, or they never would have, or certainly not in their childhood, because it wasn't being taught at school and the parents weren't exposed to it, so they didn't know. I love that you did that. And the thing is, there's a ripple effect there. Those girls, the one going to Portland, Oregon, she knew what it was, what that food was.
Right.
And she's exposing other people to it. And every time she comes home to Montana, she knows what's here. And she can bring even more of that exposure to her community. And I just so appreciate that you brought that to the community in Bozeman.
Yes, and I did farmers market at some point in my life. At the beginning of my catering life, I didn't even know I was going to be a caterer, but I was actually an interior designer. I don't know if I told you that story in Helena at Pierce Flooring and Design, a flooring company that you may know of, a Montana family. And the manager said, if you want to get any business in the construction world, you can go to a job site and bring a bag of donuts. And, that might get you in. And I'm like, I didn't grow up with donuts. How do I think? So I made a salsa that we make in Colombia, a cilantro salsa. And I would come with a bag of chicks and a tub of salsa. And they call me the salsa lady. And that's kind of how.
That's brilliant. I love that.
So they my accounts, and it's not that I wanted to be different. I just wanted to be who I was, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and it happened to stand out because it was so unique in the area.
Yes, exactly. So the construction workers would say, ma'am, you got to take this, you got to sell this salsa. So I did it. I followed them. And I got a wholesaler's license. And I had a friend who I did the flooring for. He had a restaurant. He rented his kitchen by the hour. And then I would go to the farmer's market and sell my salsas. I had a mango one and a cilantro one. But because I like to have a lot going. I said, no, I got to do something more. So I started making arepas. And at the beginning, nobody at the farmer's market knew what an arepa was. And then when I didn't show up, oh, where were you last week? I was looking for my arepas. Yes, we're eating arepas now.
Think of the exposure that people are having through food. I mean, I know a lot of people who love bagels and cream cheese, but they don't necessarily know that that is a traditionally Jewish cultural food. They love matzo ball soup. They don't know that that's actually a Passover food. I mean, it's hilarious. And I love that you brought that to the farmer's market, to these construction workers, because again, you're exposing them to a different experience and you are changing their brain in that they may have had an idea of what a person from Colombia would be like.
Right.
And now
I think it goes back to how on your philosophy about the story.
Mhm.
It all ties into how you open this session. In my opinion, there's a story and we got to tell the story because don't we learn from stories? So,
yes. Claudia, thank you so much. This has been such a treat, as I knew it would. And I know that we will get to see each other in person in the near future because we don't live very far
I get to see you. I remember our conversations in Helena. That was no, was it Anaconda, right? Were we not?
It was at Fairmont Hot Springs.
Fairmont Hot Springs. Yes, yes.
I remember
So thanks for having me over. I appreciate it.
Well, it's been my pleasure. And listeners, follow Claudia. You'll see her links in the show notes associated with this episode at elkinsconsulting.com under the podcast page. You'll be able to follow her on Instagram and on Facebook and keep an eye out for her lentil queen information and recipes. I still use one of the recipes that I got from her 2 years ago. And listeners, now it's your turn. I would love to see some comments or get an email from you about how sharing food, breaking bread together, changed your mind about something or someone. I would love to hear the story of the time that you ate with people or surrounded a dining room table with other people where you experienced something unexpected, or maybe something that changed your life, changed everything about how you perceived something that you were surprised by. I would love to hear your comments. Claudia, thank you again for joining me on Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much.
You must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.